It's time for a little year in review, both with good advice and how I feel like businesses did overall. Was this a good year? Was this a bad year? Was this a year that businesses boomed? No. Was it a year where businesses were doomed? You see what I did there? We're going to talk about it and what it means for next year, especially if you're running a business now or thinking about starting a business in this next calendar year. We're going to get into it today. But before we do, we have a word from one of the amazing businesses that sponsors the podcast. Thank you for supporting the show. I so appreciate it. We also have our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice. What the heck you waiting on? For the price of $5 a month, you can support the podcast. And I wish I could say like something else, like good fortune will come your way. I have no idea, but it is something you can do nonetheless. And then also, if you want to advertise on the show, you can always reach out, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. Let's get into it. Here's a quick ad. Be right back. There's one single piece of advice that I give to business owners who are ready to scale their business drastically. And that's knowing exactly what you need to hand off so that you can continue focusing on what you're an expert in. It amazes me when I talk to business owners who are doing their own bookkeeping and tax prep, and worse, that they're going through all this paperwork at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, even midnight, slaving away trying to make sense of all of the numbers for their business. Business owners who are making it happen have already figured out that you can't do it all yourself. That's why I recommend Steve Lay with Equity Business Solutions. Not only is he an expert in bookkeeping and tax prep, but what I love about Steve is that he'll sit down with you and help you make sense of the value of your business beyond just reading a spreadsheet. You'll be able to make better decisions, and more importantly, you're going to save yourself the crucial time you would have spent going through QuickBooks or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is that keeps us up late at night. So save yourself some time and some money by giving Steve Lay a call at Equity Business Solutions, and he'll show you the value beyond your numbers. Go to equitybusinesssolutionsllc.com to find out more. So I'm in a little bit of a weird mood today. I'm in a little bit of my feels because I'm a little bummed out looking at the end of the year. Part of this is frankly, just a number of conversations with friends and with business owners and customers, even just people who did not see their business go the way they wanted it to go. I had a couple that I was talking to last week or earlier this week, we were chatting and we had a conversation at the start of the year. And then we were having a conversation just a few days ago and talking about kind of the differences. And the husband was like, yeah, I mean, when you asked me at the start of the year where I thought the business was going to go, definitely different than where it is now. They had some things pop up with their own life. They had other things that had caught their attention, and they weren't able to dedicate the time and attention to their business. So the business didn't go the way they wanted it to go. And then I know another person I was talking to earlier this week at our growth group was talking about how he was looking at some other opportunities, maybe getting back into the workforce, just not seeing deals realize like he thought they would. I've heard this version of this story many times over the last couple of months, especially people whose businesses just didn't, and for whatever reason, either didn't do what they thought it would do, or they were tired. They were tired after a really chaotic 2020 year, trying to claw back lost revenue, dealing with a difficult economy. And many of us business owners found ourselves in a very challenging circumstance. I was thinking about my business. I was thinking about Good Advice. I was thinking about Podcastable. And I have every reason, I think, to celebrate. And I don't know if you've ever felt this way where you feel negative about something and the math doesn't check out. Like you're not sure why. It's like sometimes I'll talk to my wife and I'll say, yeah, I'm feeling kind of disappointed. And she's like, well, why? And I'm like, I don't know why. So maybe I lack introspection or self-awareness or whatever the term is. But I was thinking about Good Advice and I was feeling disappointed, I guess. And I don't know. I wasn't feeling like as we wrap up the year, I don't feel myself patting myself on the back and, applauding myself for a job well done. And the weird part about it is, look, I was looking at the numbers today. The 2 years ago, so last year, I doubled the revenue for my business from the year before. So 2023 doubled the revenue from 2022. Looking at this year, revenue has again pretty much very close to doubled again for 2024. I can't remember what year we were in all of a sudden. So I've doubled my revenue twice now in the last 2 years. It's going well on paper. I have a lot to celebrate, and I've already secured some really great deals from next year. I have a couple of projects that I'm working on that I'm really excited about. Some good work that I know that both on the good advice side of things and the podcastable side of things, some good things that are happening, done deals that just need to be, I just have to do the work. So some guaranteed somewhat revenue for next year. And I found myself thinking like, man, why am I not more like, why don't I feel better? I guess is kind of what I'm getting at. I've been reading a lot of different headlines, checking the Fayetteville Flyer, which is like the local, I was about to say the local news. I don't actually know what is the local news, but in terms of like what people typically go to. But for me, it's been pretty good for just like business heads up. Seeing the number of businesses that have shut down this last year, just some iconic local places, it bums me out. Lewis and Clark. That place had been around forever, since I was in college, I feel like. Mango's, Rick's Iron Skillet, which I felt like was kind of a hidden gem. And I guess in retrospect, maybe it was a little too hidden. Damn Good Pies. I was sharing at the Friday morning networking event that I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share, a coaching moment at and share some thoughts at. I got to share a concept. It really wasn't a concept as much as it was a reflection of just how like businesses come and go. And I remember when Damn Good Pies opened in Little Rock and now seeing it gone, I was kind of like, man, it's weird. It's weird seeing the full life cycle of a business. It's weird seeing a business that started, grew, and then ended and shut down. It's a weird feeling. And I think part of me feels a little sad because some of these businesses are such cornerstone cultural pieces to our city. Like when someone comes in town, like I remember years ago, I was working at this consulting company. We did leadership consulting and we had some executives come in who were doing like this leadership event. And I was picking one of the guys up at the airport and thinking about where to go to eat. And I took him to McAllister's. And I even remember in hindsight, I'm like, why did I go to McAllister's? There were so many options. But I remember even he was like, man, so Bentonville, like home of Walmart. And we're at McAllister's, huh? And he wasn't like mad about it, but he was kind of teasing me about it. And I was like, yeah. And in retrospect, I'm like, that was so weird and goofy. But, nowadays, if I'm getting together with someone, I have a couple of my favorite places, but man, especially a good local joint it's fun to take someone to a local spot and let them experience, it'd be like taking someone to Wright's Barbecue. It's like, yeah, man, we got to go to Wright's. Let me show you what, one restaurant we're really proud of that's here in our town. Or if I'm getting coffee with someone, I'm like, let's go to Onyx or let's go to Confident Coffee. Or, there's a number. I met a guy at Puritan the other day or about a month and a half ago. And, it's fun. It's fun to go to these local places. So when one of them shuts down, I don't know, part of me is kind of like, man, we're losing. There's a little bit of like the local spice that's getting lost. So I guess it's silly to talk about all this stuff. I mean, there's nothing really that interesting about, yeah, businesses come and go, I guess, but my heart is heavy, I think because, and I think this is also why there's a disconnect between how well Good Advice did this year and how I feel today is because, man, I got to tell you, I clawed for every dollar my business made this year. None of it was easy. None of it came simple. Like I had to work hard for everything and I had to work some really long hours to make things happen. There were a lot of deals that were insane on paper that never went anywhere. There were deals that I was somewhat sure they were going to happen that never did, which if you're in sales, you know this. You've you've lived that life. You know the deals that were for sure going to happen and yet the DocuSign never got opened. The signature never got inked. It just never happened. But I think about, man, 10, 20, $30,000 deals that they just didn't happen. So I look at my revenue and I'm like, man, yeah, it was a great year. And I also think like, but man, it could have been insane. And I think part of that is me just learning to be a better salesperson. It's learning how to do business better. I mean, that's the name of the podcast is, for you guys who've listened long term, I'm not an expert at any of this. I'm not, this super savvy business owner. Much of what I talk about on the podcast is very frankly the extremely painful mistakes that I've made that I'm like, hey, don't do this. So like when I talk about whenever you're buying from someone and you're trying to get guarantees around like what are the outcomes of our work together, that's not because I read a book on like mitigating risk. It's because I spent $15,000 on a marketing agency that didn't do anything for me. It was a really big mistake. When I do a podcast episode on being really clear about expectations with your hire and holding them, you can be a great boss and a transparent leader, but you have to hold them accountable to like what the outcomes are for the business. That's not because I read a book on leadership. It's because I've spent thousands of dollars hiring and realizing, you know what, maybe I leaned too heavy into giving someone the total autonomy to do whatever it is they were going to do. Maybe they could have used a little bit more. I didn't want to be the micromanager, but maybe there was a middle option there where it wasn't like I was blissfully, unaware or absent or what have you, but I could have at least, it's like the dad who you push the kid on the training wheels and but you don't want to be like the dad, like the kid's 16 and you're still like pushing them on the train. They're like, dude, for real, like I got it. But there's at least still like those first steps, right? It's like, hey, let's start here. Let's collaborate together. And I think I didn't want to be the crazy boss. And I've done so much leadership content and leadership work and consulted with so many companies on leadership that I know really well what not to be. And I think I jumped into management, which I mean I've managed endlessly in the past, but specifically one hire that I'm thinking of, I think the business was growing so much, I had my finger off the pulse a little too much. So when I talk about expectations, that's because I've lived that pain point, right? Talking with so many businesses, if you're not in the business world, maybe you listen to the podcast because you just like the idea of thinking about that next side hustle, or you have a business you're thinking about long term. It bums me out to see the pain that so many people have experienced. And it's human nature. We don't fail and then chalk it up to, whoops, didn't get that one. I'll just try it again. When we fail, we typically, what we most often do is I'm not good enough. I screwed it up. I'm an idiot. Why can't I do this? We start to look at ourselves pretty harshly rather than realizing, like I'll tell a story about a customer I had a couple of years ago. I think actually it was maybe 2020, maybe 2021. Wasn't a good customer. Probably the worst customer I've ever had. And not in terms of just not because they were like a crazy person. It just we just weren't not aligned. And I've told this story a few times, but all this to say, my work is typically very digital. I mean, we're looking at your books, we're looking at your numbers. A lot of our work together gets stored as, a Google Sheet or a Google Doc. And there's very much this digital component of us collaborating together. We're talking over email. I send a lot of video content. Maybe we're meeting over Zoom or Google Meet or what have you. So you got to have an internet connection for us to be able to collaborate. Well, I did have a customer who didn't use the internet and didn't, wasn't that they were, I think, against it. They just didn't really use it. And it was very difficult to collaborate with them. And we had very different expectations on what the nature of our work together should look like. I was really bummed out about that deal, about that customer, because they weren't happy about the outcome and I wasn't happy about it. But I talked to a friend of mine about this, just an incredible coach in her own right. And she helped me realize something. She said, Blake, you have such a digital approach to doing things, and yet you brought on this customer who is not digital. So is the pain point that you're not good at this, or, you're stupid or whatever, she didn't necessarily say that, but, I'm just ad-libbing here with like some of the things we go with. Is that really the issue? Or is the issue really that you two weren't on the same page and it was just a mistake? And now some of the questions to ask with your next customer, namely, hey, we're going to use Google Sheets. Are you cool with that? Do you, just explaining the process a little bit. So she helped me understand, it really wasn't about me. It just was a poor fit. It was a lesson that I learned. And part of this, by the way, now, like going back to the concept I was sharing earlier, whenever I onboard a new customer, there's a lot that's front loaded in terms of what this looks like, in terms of what our commitments together are going to look like. And part of that's out of that pain point. But when I do podcast content around that, again, it's out of me having made the mistakes, having lived it myself. And that's always been the premise of the podcast. I say it in the intro, like we don't do a lot of academic or MBA or, business theory. The stuff we talk about on the show is the stuff that's actually working, and it's what people are actually doing. And it's the real lived experiences of what does it mean to run a business. It doesn't mean it's always 100% correct. I have had many takes over the years that probably weren't correct in hindsight. I have one right now that talks a lot about AI. I talk a lot about AI on the podcast, and I rail a lot against AI. And what I share about AI is, hey, it amplifies the work you're doing. It is a great supporting tool, but it can't be the content. It can't be the main course. It can't be the heart of your business. If I read a headline about a woman, a guy who was sitting on a plane next to a woman who she was going to this big event, this big like sales meeting or consulting meeting, and it was like a multi-million-dollar deal. And she was having ChatGPT write the pitch. Now, the nuance of this is maybe this person just wasn't good at pitch decks and excuse me, maybe this person just wasn't good at pitch decks, but they're brilliant at a couple other things. And so, ChatGPT is excellent for filling in the gaps there. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about businesses that, you AI is the heart and soul of your business. I think that's a problem. And I think those businesses aren't going to last. Now, having said that, excuse me, having said that, I could be wrong. It could be that 3 years from now, I look back and say, man, the people who did that, who just heavily used AI, who like ran their businesses with it as its cornerstone, man, maybe those people won out. I was wrong. So I'm willing to be wrong. I am not so ego driven to think that everything I share on the podcast is 100% correct. It's just the experiences of what I'm living, the experience of what my customers are living, and the conversations I'm having with business owners each and every day. So, all that to say, I'm having a lot of conversations with business owners who their businesses just did not do what they thought it was going to do. And it bums me out. Maybe that's why I'm discouraged is, we don't always have these conversations. We don't always talk about these things in the light. It is usually what's on social media. Man, I remember a person I was talking to who someone we ended up chatting together, but I think she was like a big marketing person, or I can't really remember the details, but she had talked a lot about all the success she was having. And we finally sat down and began looking at her revenue. And she hadn't made a sale in a year, or maybe 9 months, 10 months. And I remember thinking, like, man, the version that you talk about yourself with is very different from what we're looking at right here in the actual books. It's very different from the actual results you're getting. But this person, for better or worse, probably worse, felt the need to share about all these accolades, incredible things, and what have you that was happening with her business. So as I've had more and more real conversations with people, man, you guys got to know there are people who are really hurting out there, who are fighting tooth and nail for their business. They're fighting to gain every inch they can in a crowded marketplace, a place that's growing every day. It's evolving every day. It's becoming more difficult to stand out every day. I do think, by the way, it's a great opportunity for a podcast. It's a great way to differentiate yourself. It's a great way to stand out and do things a little bit differently. Or if nothing else, to really embrace this idea of I have a living, breathing brand and not just, a logo that I'm hoping is going to generate business for my business. Nothing against logos or logo designers, by the way. But yeah, I don't know. It's a weird episode today. It's a weird episode. It's a weird vibe because, like I said, I'm feeling kind of down about it all. And yet again, on paper, I already know I'm going to try to overcorrect this episode by putting something out before the new year. And I'm already thinking about it. So you're going to see it. You can already know it's going to happen, but it's going to be something about counting your wins or what have you. I mean, for real, business doubled in revenue since last year. That's a big accolade for how hard it was to, survive as a business owner in today's economy. That's a huge accolade. Part of that, I think also part of that is I doubled my prices from last year, probably going to double them again next year. So I think that is a big piece of it. I think that helps, when you increase your dollar price, you increase the value. Hopefully you increase the value of what you deliver. I think that's how I've always liked to do business is the accountability is on me to deliver. I'm going to bring these prices up. So now I need to make sure I'm actually delivering on that. But all that to say, I think the reminder for us all today is to remember the value of the local business owner, the small business owner who is doing everything they can. And here's what you can know. A lot of these business owners, they don't have a business degree. They didn't go to business school. Most of my customers that I end up collaborating with, it's rare that any of them have any kind of formal business training. They've just figured out something that they love doing. Maybe they worked in a senior role at a previous company. They never had any business degree, but they just learned how this thing works. And a lot of business owners are constantly trying to figure out more and more, man, what does it look like to run a successful business? Nothing against really chains or big name brands or what have you. But what I can really say is if you want to invest in your community, start with the local businesses. Those local businesses are putting dollars back directly. I mean, they're paying taxes in your community even. I mean, that money stays here as opposed to, you pay money at some big brand, big chain, what have you. And I don't mean this in a depressing way, but chances are they don't give a rip about your town. They're thinking about shareholders. They're thinking about market share. They're thinking about, how do we beat This other competitor we have, how do we go from 90 locations to 130 locations in the next 2 or 3 years? Like they're thinking all about scale, all about size. And for the most part, they're not thinking about your small town. Small town. I mean, you could live in a big town. I don't know. So all the more reason then to support the businesses, the culture of where you live, these cornerstone pieces, because man, with all the conversations I'm having, we need help. We need help. We need people to think about and care for and be intentional on shopping local, even when the prices are a little bit higher. We've been in a weird place where prices are so jacked lately that I think there was this tension in the past about, well, I could shop local, but it's so much more expensive than shopping abroad. And, nowadays pricing is so weird that in many cases you can shop local and pay the same as what you would pay at an online store or a virtual store. And I'm not saying you have to do literally everything local. It's totally understandable. Maybe a guy in another state who's part of a bigger brand and they get you a cut on a deal, or you have this awesome coupon for. I get it. I'm not trying to guilt anybody into being so holistic around shopping local that you're a bad person if you don't. All I'm talking about is just being a little bit more intentional, especially during the holiday season, being a little bit more intentional. And you know what? If you're in the business world, maybe you're in the B2B world, maybe you've been sitting on a referral. Maybe you've been sitting on a referral that an introduction you've been meaning to make and you haven't gotten around to it, but someone who's been looking to hire someone else and who that someone else is, but you've been waiting to do it. Just like, I never really got around to it. Maybe the smallest thing you can do is make that introduction. Hey, I know I said I would, and it's been a couple months, but better late than never. Let me introduce you two together. But all that to say, we gotta support our local businesses. We gotta support our local brands. I am hopeful that 2025 is a better year, but I'm not ignorant to the fact that nothing is guaranteed in the future. Nothing is guaranteed in the future. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking about your own business and you're thinking about, how do I grow my business in 2025? How do I do better? Here's what I can tell you what's worked for me. When I think about, and I need to probably get a little bit more in the weeds on what changed between this year and last year, which there is some nuance there, like increasing my prices. But the two things that I would really challenge you to think about if you're a business owner: what very simply are you offering? What is your offer? What do you do? Literally the exact problem you solve and how you do it. And if you can only say that in a 10-minute explanation, it's too complex. If your answer to that is something generic, it's not specific enough, which that's a bit obvious, right? But if it's like, we're a premium shingles company that we, cover your household with quality materials. It's like, no, you're a roofer. You replace roofs that experience hail damage, or, when the shingle gets blown off by a windstorm, or is that a thing? When wind blows it off or what have you. So getting critically consistent about who you are and what you do. And then the other thing with that is I would encourage you to deeply dedicate yourself to becoming a better salesperson. There was a moment for me, I think around year 4, where I was like, man, I'm bad at sales. Objectively, I was probably better than the average. That sounds so bad. Not the average person. I was probably better than like the random business owner who's never sold anything in their life. Like they're just starting out maybe. So I had 4 years of like having sales experiences, or actually 7 years of having like actual sales experiences that I could rely on. But objectively, I was not a good salesperson. So I had to really dedicate time and energy to it. And I'm reaping the benefit of it today only because it was something I was very intentional about. So whether that's sales for you, maybe it's something else, but I would encourage you to really focus on improving yourself in a way that is directly tied to your revenue. If I get better here, it's going to put more money in my pocket down the road. So whatever it is you sell, how do I make sure I'm truly getting better and beating my competition? And I'll leave you with a story. There was a company that ended up crashing and burning. And I was talking to someone about the company, and I think I've had this conversation so many times, and you can probably yourself think of businesses you've shopped at that you would say something like this. A business came into the marketplace and it was hot. It was doing well, signing big deals and making lots of money at first. And a couple years later, it had crashed and burned. The reason for that is when you talk to the customers, the results that were promised weren't ever delivered. And when you talk to the employees, they were frustrated about how they sold things didn't match how they knew things were getting made internally. The quality wasn't there. The processes were non-existent. And ultimately, it was a business that was leveraging a lot of positive energy and, marketing pizzazz, but not actually delivering something meaningful. If you want to make it long-term, what you do has to be meaningful. And when I say meaningful, I don't mean, it's meaningful to me because I quit my job to go do this and I'm not going to accept failure. Like I'm going to show my ex-boss that I can do it, or I'm going to show people in my life that I can do it. That's not meaningful. That's you focused. Meaningful is, this is something that customers would say is truly valuable. It's irreplaceable. And to get there, sometimes it takes looking in the mirror and realizing, okay, I'm not as good as I think I am. I'm not as qualified as I think I am. And that's not meant to be a dig, or these are hard conversations that I have with myself on, I have to get better. If I'm going to grow this thing, despite a hard economy, despite difficulty, I have to get better. Have to. It's the only way I'll survive, is I have to get better. And make sure that as you're improving, you can tie it to revenue. By getting better here, this is how it's going to put more money in my pocket. Either I can charge more, or I'm going to close more deals, or I'm going to have happier customers and more repeat customers. Don't be distracted by some random detail. Man, I'm really good at doing Trello boards now, and you don't even use them. Man, I'm really good at organizing. Man, I'm really good at writing an email when all of your deals are over the phone. Man, I'm really good at posting pictures on Instagram when none of your customers come from Instagram. So understand, it has to be something you're improving in that you can directly tie to your revenue. I'm hopeful for next year. I'm believing in Good Advice and Podcastable and my customers and you guys who are listening to the show. We are all in the thick of it. We are in a heavy season as people wrap up the year and they think about what could have been. And don't worry, I'm gonna leave us, I think, with this year with a more upbeat, positive episode. I think I'm gonna leave us with, recognizing what you did accomplish, what you did do, and that's something worth parking on. So, all that to say, hey, thanks for listening to the podcast today. If you're a first-time listener to the show, what the heck are you waiting on? Click that subscribe or follow button so you can keep getting good advice wherever you are. Don't forget, you can always support the podcast on our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice, where you can advertise an episode at blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. Hey, I'm so grateful for all of your support over the year. For those of you who listened and supported long-term, thank you so much for helping to add to the vision of Good Advice. All that to say, that's today's Good Advice. We'll catch you later. See ya.